Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. And welcome to Index Engines Ask the Experts, Episode 2. I'm your host, Rob Mossi. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing here at Index Engines. And today I'm honored to be joined by the Jims. Uh, from Index Engines, I have Jim McGann with me. He is our Vice President of Business Development. He's been with Index Engines for a number of years, and in that time, he's cultivated a number of relationships, including our partnership with Dell Technologies. Which brings me to Jim number two, Jim Shook, Esquire from Dell. And Jim is the Global Director of Cybersecurity and the Compliance Practice. He's a key player on the Dell Technologies data protection team. And in addition to Jim's JD, he holds a CISSP and a CIPP US certification. So without further ado, I think we can kind of get along with things. Before we keep going, just one quick logistical note. Please use the if you'd like to submit a question, please use the Q&A function. We are not monitoring the chat feature, so please, if you do have a question that you'd like to go ahead and share, please use that Q&A function. So with that, Jim and Jim, welcome to Ask the Experts.
Yeah, great to
So
be here. I always look forward to spending some time with Mr. Shook and talking about our favorite subject, which is cyber, right?
Likewise, thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you too.
got it. All right. So Jim Shook, I'm going to throw this question just to get things going over your way. As we kind of navigate the ever evolving landscape, especially within and cyber threats, what are some of the most significant trends that we are witnessing for both cyber attacks and ransomware?
I whittled my list down to 100, so that was only
Good.
take a little bit of time. But I picked out three, Rob. One is the threat actors, TTPs, what they do, their tactics, techniques, and procedures constantly change. And I don't even know if we can call that a trend because now it's just a truism. It's always true. A good example of that was this announcement from CISA about the Iranian actors changing up their TTPs to use password spraying. They've got MFA bombing, and then they're establishing persistence, staying in networks by changing the MFAs. Now, if you bounce them out, when they come back in, they just do their own MFA on your system. But that's common. That's what we see all the time. You can't sit in place and hope that the threat actors aren't going to improve and get better and find new holes. Second one is the regulatory landscape. So there's a lot going on. I think there's more going on really in my mind in Europe with DORA and the NIS too, but we've got stuff going on industry segmentation wise in the US. There's a lot there, but I would call out one thing, which is if you're not used to being regulated and you don't worry about these things because you're small or you're in an industry that's not well regulated, your time has come. All of the regulators are requiring much more scrutiny on the third-party supply chain. So if you have a customer or a partner who's regulated, some of that is going to come into your scope now. You're going to have to do things for them. Otherwise, they're probably not going to want to do business with you. And the third thing I'll touch on, and hey, we're 6 minutes in, we haven't said AI. So AI, that's an area that you should be thinking about. How are you going to secure and provide data protection for your AI models? What if the threat actors get to them? So I'm not talking about security from like a model poisoning or anything like that, but actually attacking the infrastructure. How are you thinking about securing that today? And a lot of people are working on that, Rob. It's probably pre-trend, but it's coming.
That's fantastic. So just kind of as a follow-up to you, Jim Shook, what are some of the implications rather around, say, it- kind of combating some of these? We're talking, there's insurance, uh, are the policies adequate? I mean, what else should a customer be considering when looking at some of these emerging threats? I mean, we all know that insurance is not the only answer.
Yeah, insurance is at best a small part of the answer. The risk, it's going to shift some of the risk of the attack onto the insurer, but that can't be your whole strategy. In fact, the insurers aren't going to insure you if you don't already have a good posture. So everybody should be looking at the basics, at least do the basics well, use a framework, use the NIST CSF to benchmark, or if you're smaller, the SIS controls, that's a good one. Make sure you're doing the basics well, and then go from there, Rob. And, insurance is good. And if you do have a policy, a lot of the insurers are doing more to help you. You can get access to annual pen tests or tabletop exercises. They'll help you improve your security. So I'm not downplaying that at all, but insurance can't be your only strategy because it's gonna fail and you're not even able to get a policy.
Yeah. So Jim McGann, let's bring you into the fold here. How are the threat actors? Jim Shook mentioned AI, right? We're now 7 minutes in, and this is our second time we're bringing up AI. But Jim McGann, let's talk a little bit about how, as part of some of these trends, how these threat actors are leveraging AI, and exposing some of those particular vulnerabilities, and what are some of those vulnerabilities that are trending today?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge, the trend or the challenge that we're seeing is that there are now these crime families that are very sophisticated, and you'll see some of these crime families be taken down. The government, grabs their servers and shuts them down. But for us, it's very much like whack-a-mole. They're going to pop up someplace else. There's no controls on their side within their organizations. As Jim mentioned, Iran is entering into the mix here, along with other organizations, and there's really no controls there. So these organizations, like Ransom Hub is now like the lead one, took over from Lockbit. I mean, it's just going to continue to change. But what we're seeing is these crime families are using sophisticated technology. I mean, if you go into some of these AI engines, you could write ransomware today. You can describe what you're looking at. It'll write the code for you. But they're smart people that are using smart technology like AI to build really sophisticated ransomware variants that a lot of the technology that many backup or storage vendors may have implemented are going to fail because they're not robust enough. And the combination of that with ransomware as a service is that you've got these really smart people in the background with a network of ransomware as a service organizations that are not technical, that are just business people going to grab money and shut companies down. So it's this like big spider web that stretches across the globe to use advanced technology on companies at scale, which we haven't seen before. So every year that we're in this business, I'm like, it can't possibly get worse, but it does, and it'll continue to get worse. And I think AI is basically throwing gasoline on a fire here, right? So, I think what organizations have struggled with is that they've continually, and I know we've preached this. I've talked to seen Dell presentations on this for 5+ years, that disaster recovery tools, as is, are not going to cut it. We see, if you look in the news this week and last week, there's a common CVE, the vulnerability that's being attacked, and these threat actors, when they see these openings, they could be minuscule openings. They'll jump in. And one of the major modern backup software vendor that's Windows based, Windows is a high value target, has a CVE that's being attacked today. And customers that are depending on that backup software for recovery are going to have a really bad day, right?
That's a
Yeah,
great point.
we talk a lot with our incident response team. To your point, Jim, the threat actors continue to evolve. So 6-7 years ago, you didn't have to worry about your backup being attacked. Then you did, and now they're very sophisticated. And what we see is in virtually every attack, the backup is attacked. Now, how far they get, can they destroy the data? Do they just destroy the infrastructure? Do they lock you out of your system? It all depends on the threat actor and your posture, but they're going after that environment. And then typically encrypting the production environment, which is how they get their money, right? They're selling the keys to decrypt. They want to prevent you from having any ability to recover because that's how they get their payday. And they're, as you said, they're very good at it.
No, backup is critical. Backup is important, but backup is a small piece of the puzzle. And I think what we've learned is if organizations are depending on backup, I mean, speaking to one customer that went through a ransomware attack, they started getting alerts from their data center. They went in, their backups were gone. And it's like, I don't know if people go through those scenarios in their mind and sit in the conference room and say, what do we do when our backups are gone? They just assume that's gonna always be there for them. And if they do, that's a mistake. And they'll learn a very expensive lesson. Right?
I think that is a great point to segue into a bit of a different topic, right? You know, Jim, it really kind of talked about how backups and that backup data is really important. But overall, when there's an attack, one of the things that happens is that the integrity of the data has been compromised, regardless of where that data sits, whether it's in primary, whether it's sitting in backups and snapshots. How important is overall data integrity to the notion of cyber recovery, of recovering from one of these devastating attacks? You know, in the case of missing backups, in the case of corrupted backups, in the case of primary data being corrupted, how important is that data integrity in order to be able to recover?
Yeah, without good data, you're going to struggle to recover, or without knowing where good data, what was impacted, what's good, what needs to be recovered, you're going to struggle to recover, especially if your backups are impacted. So I know a lot of the production storage folks and the data protection folks are adding some types of capabilities to look for some indicators that something may have happened, a change in compression rate, right? So if you're saying, well, let's monitor for changing compression rates of the backups, right? And if it's more than X%, then it was probably something bad happened and you should probably recover. We don't know what data was impacted, but just recover everything. Um, the variants they're using now with things like XOR-based encryption or base64 encryption, they don't change compression rates. So a lot of these vendors are implementing approaches that are looking for pieces of evidence, and the threat actors are smart enough to circumvent those approaches very easily, very easily. Data integrity is really a concept that we embraced with Cybersense that really inspects inside the content. And when you do have an attack, that the customer comes to the cyber recovery vault, looks at the dashboard, and says, "What happened?" It's the who, what, where, and when of it, right? So instead of like fumbling around and trying to figure it out, data integrity will tell you exactly what happened, and that gives you your game plan to recover and what needs to be recovered. So one of the examples, a lot of these companies become case studies, in the industry, and CNA Financial was a very big attack that happened over, a couple months ago or a year ago. So, but they went in and they depended on their backup software to recover. So they got attacked. Major insurance company got attacked. They had a $40 million ransomware request, and they're like, "No, we're good. We're going to recover from our backups." Right? Sounds like a smart approach, right? So they recover. They went to their backups. They're like, "Oh, let's just take this one." Recovered in, and they put all the remnants of the ransomware and the ransomware back into production. And it's like a gerbil on a wheel. It's like, oh, we got attacked again. And it's like they're not solving a problem. I mean, you need to, again, we talked about AI, we talked about sophisticated threat actors. If you're going to use basic antiquated approaches to resolve it, you're going to lose, right? I mean, there's stories like that all the time, right?
Yeah, Rob, it's as you refer to it, it's trust, and and the integrity of the data is part of that trust. So the threat actors are in. You don't know how long, you don't know how far they've reached, you don't know how sophisticated they are. Over time, you start to put those pieces together, but you don't have time. You've got to recover the business. And some of these things, we've had discussions, Jim talks about it all the time with thresholds and looking at individual kind of pieces of information from data. We were having a discussion a while ago with a customer who wasn't aware that you can just change, if you're a threat actor and you modify a file, you can change the modified access created dates very easily. It's just metadata on the file. In fact, there's a technique in the MITRE attack framework called time stomping that refers to that. So TTPs, back to our TTPs, there's actually a technique that a lot of threat actors use. If you're just looking at those basics, you're really not going to have a good picture of data that's clean, data that's good. You need to analyze it thoroughly. You know, what you do with Cybersense is spot on for that type of capability, right? You can't just take shortcuts on this. It's very important that when you do recover the business, you're recovering back to trusted data.
Right.
Yeah,
And that's something.
and you know, the example that I use a lot that sounds pretty basic, but it kind of explains what other approaches are doing. I mean, for us, data integrity is inspecting inside content, files and databases, looking at the bits and the bytes of it and seeing if they've hidden things like intermittent encryption or pages of databases have been corrupted. So the example I use, which is very basic, is like, you know, some of these tools like threshold analysis, looking for compression rates, looking for metadata changes, is if you suspect your house is being robbed and you call the police and they come and they look at your house and they walk around the perimeter of your house and they say everything looks good, have a good day, and they leave. You know, with Cybersense, what we're doing is going inside the house, checking under every bed, inside every closet, making sure that the house is secure and the house is fine. Simple example, but that is fundamentally the difference. They're doing a very cursory look at data and saying, yeah, you're probably good. And if you use XOR-based encryption, you could have hundreds of thousands of files encrypted, and these tools would never see it, and your business will be impacted. It's that simple, right?
So Jim McGann, Jim Shook took a little page out of our marketing there, and we talked a little bit about trust. Jim, what's your take on trust? We talked. There was a great example earlier in this session where backups were gone, right? That obviously that company put their trust in the fact that their data protection was was going to be there when they needed it in that disaster scenario, in that recovery scenario. How important is being able to trust your vendors to be able to accomplish what they're really trying to do in the prevention of ransomware attacks and or the discovery of ransomware attacks and ultimately the recovery.
Yeah, I mean, people are putting the critical data infrastructure content into the Dell Cyber Recovery Vault that runs their business. So without that, their business will not run. I mean, I spoke to a major transportation organization. They're saying if we're down for 5 days, we're out of business. I mean, this is a well-known brand across the globe. 5 days, they're done. I was with Jim at a conference in Toronto a few months ago, and we just had conversation after conversation with customers that just talked about trust. I mean, one not a Dell customer, but not yet a cyber recovery vault that's using brand X backup software said, yeah, I read about this stuff being attacked all the time. I'm like, yeah, you really need to rethink that. And you're doing backups out in production in the wild on these window-based platforms. You kind of have a target on your back, And he goes, yeah, I don't feel like I trust that we'll be able to recover. I'm like, you really need to look at the vault and what we do. He goes, yeah, we're looking at it. I feel good about it. And another customer that presented at this conference was talking about their experience in a previous healthcare organization where they had a ransomware attack. And he got into the office, saw the backups were gone, saw the data it just was a devastated attack. He basically said it was the worst 33 days of his life, 33 days in recovering. So can you imagine running your business for 33 days without having access to everything you need to run your business? He said one of the first things we did when he moved to his new organization is that they acquired the Cyber Recovery Vault with Cybersense. He said, every morning I get an alert out of the vault that the data's secured, the data's isolated, it's mutable, no one could touch it. and it's been scanned and it has integrity, and it's the best part of my day, and I go about my day knowing I'm good. So, people say, there's a lot to the vault. There's a lot of technology of scanning inside files and so on, but that one sentence is worth millions of dollars to many organizations. Is the fact, and we know. I mean, Jim, we've talked about this for years. Is the only way that you would have confidence, 100% confidence, knowing that your data is there when you need it and is reliable, is having it in an isolated vault, having it locked down so no one can get access to it, and having it scanned with full content scan to check the integrity of it. I mean, that is the only way. I mean, there's lots of other bells and whistles out there that other vendors talk about, but they're not going to have that confidence. And again, we announced a 99.99 SLA. We don't release software until we have that level of confidence, 4 nines, in detecting corruption. So we are giving customers that level of confidence that we've delivered through technology. Right, Jim?
Absolutely critical. Yeah. It's not, as our incident response team talks about it, when that happens, it's probably the worst day of your professional life. And you don't want to go, oh, I hope everything's okay. You want to know that you've got a path back within a reasonable amount of time that's going to meet the business requirements. And you have the plan ahead for that to an extent. We're still doing everything we can to stop the attacks, to limit the attacks. The threat actors still get through. And that ability to recover safely, recover to a known good state with your data having been scanned and confirmed as good is absolutely critical.
Again, Jim Shook, you are the master at the segue here. This is a perfect time, I think, to talk a little bit about post-attack. What, so it's happened at this point, right? We've all the steps that we've needed to take as a customer are in place, or maybe they're not in place. Let's talk a little bit about post-attack and what are some of the steps that a customer needs to take in order to really recover from one of these devastating attacks.
If you haven't been through it and you're kind of just listening to the industry, it seems like you just go find a copy of data or a backup of a virtual machine and you just spin these things up and you're back to business. And nothing could be further from the truth. If you have something like that happen, then maybe the attack was very limited, you stopped it, or who knows what happened. But in a real attack, something that's moderate to severe, there are a bunch of steps. The first thing is, what happened? We don't know what happened. It's not like the ransomware alert goes off. Systems start to fail. It's usually over a weekend or a holiday. It takes a little while to figure out what happened. Then you've got to contain that threat. Threat actors don't always just walk away. They're often monitoring what you're doing. They're reading your emails. They're looking over your shoulder because they want to get paid. So you've got to contain that threat, which often involves turning off access and maybe even cutting off your internal access between certain segments if you've done any segmentation. You have to eradicate the threat actor. So you have to get rid of them and all their persistence tools. Are they hiding in Active Directory? Do they have malware elsewhere? All those things. Get to root cause, what happened, and then you need to prepare infrastructure to recover. So your data is encrypted. Some people pay the ransom. There's a reason that this industry is still going strong, and that's because a lot of people are paying the ransom. But some way you have to get infrastructure to recover to, which might be wiping your existing, you might get new. You've got to get data. You have to know that data is clean, and then you can start that recovery process. Hopefully you've done your homework. You know what order you're going to do it in. You know which systems you're bringing up first, because again, you're not going to hit a button and bring everything back up. So there's those series of steps, no matter who you are, and they take time. And that average time is about 24 days. Nobody wants to hear that. And you can certainly shorten that time. You can lengthen that time. That's just kind of the marker that we hear again and again, 3 to 4 weeks for recovery. Jim, your customer who said they would be out after 5 days, they can get 5 days for their critical systems, but it's going to take a lot of work for them to do that. And Rob, people I don't think understand, if they haven't been through it, what that process really looks like, because it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of people getting together to figure that out. you don't figure it out before the attack, you're going to figure it out after the attack. That's why these things start to take 3, 4, 5 weeks for recovery, because you're doing things on the fly after you should have already been prepared.
Right, right. How costly is the time, right? To some of these. I mean, Jim brought up the 5-day example earlier. Uh, you know, how costly really is that time when you're down and not fully functioning?
Your one cost is you're losing revenue. You can measure that one. There's cost, your people costs, you're bringing in third parties, you're paying money out, you've got damage to your brand. There's a lot of different costs. I think the big one that's easiest for people to think about is how much revenue do you make in a day, and either cut that by 100% or 80% or 60% through that kind of curve, and it adds up. It's expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Rob, you were just buying a car for your son, and the car dealer network was attacked and shut down, and you had struggled buying a car, and this was after months of this being attacked. So, I mean, you look at that, you look at those things, and it's really again about reputation too. I mean, I was talking to someone who, when I mentioned I was in the cyber business, that was like, yeah, I had a doctor's appointment. They were writing everything down because their systems were not working, and I'm like, that's what I do. I mean, try to prevent that from happening, because you violate a lot of regulatory issues. The customer is, what do they think about your healthcare organization that goes back to like 1950 something, and how they do business, or trying to buy a car when you struggle doing that. So the impact is huge, and I think I mean, the only having the secure data that's been analyzed and having a dashboard that tells you everything that happened, what Jim was talking about is the who, what, where, and when of it, and trying to figure that out after the attack is costly and very time consuming. But having the confidence to say, I have all the answers to those questions, I just need to go in the vault and all the answers are there for me, changes the whole game on these. So, and what we're talking about is stopping the attack is a really admirable task, and there's thousands of companies trying to do that. That's great, but being able to recover and recover smarter and recover with minimal data loss and minimize the impact of the attack, that is really what customers need to shift their focus to. And if they're not doing that and don't have a strategy there, that's a fatal mistake.
Yeah. Jim Shook, is there anything from a Dell Recovery Services perspective that you want to kind of bring into this, post-attack type of scenario?
Yes, I talked a little bit about our incident response and recovery team. They've been around 5 years. They've done over 500 recoveries for all kinds of customers globally, not just Dell customers, but people that have been attacked, and they're experts in that process and in that recovery process. So they love it when they go somewhere and there's a vault and there's Cybersense, but many times it's not, and it just makes the job a little bit tougher. Align to them, have them come in and talk to you. They're really great helping people understand what these attacks look like, and then you want to have their number on speed dial or a retainer or something so that you're prepared. And a little bit of preparation can go a long way. If you have them come in, they can kick the tires, they can understand what your architecture looks like. So if you do have an event, they can be there in a guaranteed amount of time. They've already got a lot of information, and they can really hit the ground running. So it's a really good service, Rob, and nobody wants to be there having to do the recovery. You want to stop that attack and prevent that attack. It's just a reality for a lot of organizations that they're going to have to reach that point at some time.
Excellent. So just a quick note to the audience. I've tried to incorporate some of the questions that have come in into this conversation. If there are any last minute questions, please feel free to throw them into the Q&A section. But there's one question I did want to just ask, and Jim McGann, I think you can probably take the lead on this one, is around AI. We talked about it a couple times during this. How exactly is Index Engines and the Vault, so to speak, really leveraging AI for the detection of ransomware?
So we have a lab that is dedicated to testing our software. So When we see new variants, what the AI engine is doing is looking for patterns of behavior, which is indicative of what the bad actors are doing in corrupting data. So they do very specific things, and the variants do very specific things. Intermittent encryption, obfuscation, corruption of the header, maybe changing the extension. They're doing that less and less. But the kind of things that they do and the patterns of behavior, and that's so the AI engine is a very smart engine that needs to be trained to look for those patterns. So it's based on a continual training process. It's trained on a continual basis with actual ransomware. So we download ransomware that we see off different sources, the dark web, VirusTotal, other locations. We get feedback from customers to help train it and keep on updating it. Now, it's not to say a customer needs to update the AI engine every day to scan data, because the patterns don't change that dramatically. They do change. But continually updating the AI engine is based on actual execution of ransomware. I don't know any other vendor that's doing that today to train the AI engine. And then continually look for any kind of changes or patterns. We've seen intermittent encryption was a big change in patterns of behavior. We don't see huge shifts in those patterns, but they do happen. So Cybersense has been using AI for many, many years now, and will continue to use AI. The lab that we have is how we validate the 99.99% precision in finding that corruption. And we couldn't do that without AI. AI is just taking lots of data points in to a highly trained engine and making very deterministic decisions about this is corruption due to ransomware. You don't want to get alerts saying, hey, I think something happened over there because a bunch of thresholds changed or metadata changed. Go figure it out. You want a deterministic response from the vault saying, hey, we know something happened and we know it was ransomware and this is what happened to these files. Go fix it. That's what you want. You want a deterministic approach, and that's from AI, versus other approaches that are just looking for some indicators which may or may not be corruption.
Excellent. Jim Shook, are there some best practices for getting data off of the vault and into back into production? Somebody's looking for some actual documentation on this as well, but I think if you can just at least start this off by just talking about some of those best practices, that'll get us probably help out this question. They're looking for also for some kind of white paper that might address that, which I'm sure we can find over at Dell.com. But are there any best practices that you'd like to address?
Yeah, I think what the Vault does is it provides you with that clean copy of data that's been analyzed by Cybersense. Now, what do you do with that data? There's a couple of different paths to take depending on what your requirements are, how mature your processes are. Some customers are looking at setting up new infrastructure. We use terms like clean room and things a little bit loosely, but new infrastructure that would run immediately and provide the core services or the main infrastructure for the company, which is going to be a very small part, like the key applications. You could recover immediately to that infrastructure. If you're more traditional and you have the vault, but you don't have clean infrastructure, you're still going to have to go through some of the steps of the process to eradicate the threat actor, but you're eliminating the testing and all the other steps that you have to take if you didn't have the vault. You know that data is good. And then there's things that can be in between. You might speed up your testing process. So Rob, to your point, we have a paper that talks about recovery, kind of 3 or 4 different processes depending on your level of maturity. Some of these things cost money to be prepared for because you've got to have infrastructure that's awaiting your use, and not everybody wants to do that. So we do from the very simple process to up to what we would call a minimum viable company. But the vault, the clean data, the assurance from Cybersense, the understanding of where that threat came from and what data was attacked helps you regardless of the route that you're taking back.
Great. All right. Well, gentlemen, I think we're going to wrap this up. I can't thank you both enough. Jim Shook from Dell Technologies, Jim McGann from Index Engines. Thank you so much for being here this morning. And we are going to go ahead and sign off. Everyone out there in from our viewers. We will be having episode 3 in December 2024. So please stay tuned for that, and we'll be continuing Ask the Experts into the new year as well. All of these episodes are recorded, and we will make those recordings available through social channels. So again, stay tuned for that as well. But in the meantime, thank you everyone for attending this morning, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Ask the Experts. Thank you.